Lying next to them every night, but you've never felt more alone. Sound familiar? I hear this from others in our community, both male and female, all the time. So I've asked Mindy Reichart from Relationships Unlocked to join me today and give us some real answers. Hi, I'm Sandy Zuniga, the founder of Colorado Springs Town Tidings. Be in the know on the go for all things Colorado Springs, delivered right to your inbox. Mindy is a local relationship coach who specializes in helping couples reconnect. Mindy, welcome. Before we dive in, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what brought you to this work?
Sure. Um, so I am a wife and a mom. Um, excuse me. I have been married for 28 years. I I met my husband by happenstance. We got married a year and a half later, and that was 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And yeah,
Wow.
we have three kids. Our oldest is 25, almost 24, and a 21-year-old. And yeah, I just always wanted to be a wife and a mom, and was very involved in my kids' lives and school and activities and things like that. And when they were older and didn't need me as much anymore, I kind of didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was really, who I wanted to be, what I wanted to
Yeah.
be, that kind of thing. And then I found a company called Pure Romance, and it changed my life in so many ways. Um, but that's kind of how this all started. I branched out from there after being a consultant with them for 6 years. Well, at that time, 5 years. Um, and then, yeah, branched out into the coaching side because I found that I really liked working with individuals and couples versus the big parties and things like that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so here we are.
So the relationship part, you were a mother, well, you are a mother and a wife. And as we get older and there's an empty nest, a lot of us do try and have to reinvent ourselves when your identity is all about the children, the partner, and that time in your life. We go through stages in our lives. So is it that when you were left trying to think of who am I now, did it kind of connect like I'm good at relationships? Let me look into that. Can I help others? Or was it kind of a different path?
It was kind of different. It sort of just fell into my lap. Like I said, I got introduced to Pure Romance again by happenstance. I met somebody who was a friend of a friend of a friend, and yeah, I had a party, um, that kind of thing, and just what I learned about myself and my body and my relationship and everything just at that party changed so much in my life that I was like, I need to shout this from the rooftops. I need to share this with all the women everywhere. And so, and then, over the years, it just kind of branched into, working with couples, on one to one and realizing that, I'm actually kind of good at this. So let's see where it goes.
Great. And then, so after Pure Romance, you wound up diving deeper into it and got a few certifications and things like that.
Yep. Yeah. I got a, well, three certifications I had to get to become a master relationship coach. So here we are.
What did your husband think about all of this?
Um, it's really funny because my husband is actually very private. Um, so of all the jobs that I could have chosen, but he's honestly been my biggest cheerleader the whole time. And yeah, he fully supports, what I do. He tells people, other people, colleagues, what I do, and like he'll come home and be like, "It's okay, you're going to get a call from so and so," and things like that. So
That's
yeah,
great.
he's my biggest advocate. He's my biggest cheerleader.
And I assume he benefits from it.
He does. Like I said, I learned so much about myself that did change a lot of things in our marriage, improved a lot of things in our marriage. And then as I go, like as I'm coaching somebody, um, and giving them advice or tips or whatever, I'm like, thinking in my head, this is good stuff. I need to actually use this in my relationship as well. So yeah, so we benefit from it pretty well.
Great. So you are here local, but I don't think you started off local in the Colorado Springs area, did you?
No, no, no. We've been here 18 years. My husband is retired Air Force, and so we decided to retire here. But both of us actually grew up in Maine. Um, we didn't know each other growing up. We met again by accident, just randomly. And he was stationed in Florida when we met. He was home on leave,
Oh,
and I was a line dance instructor.
oh,
And
nice.
so we met at a dance, and yeah, it just kind of went from there. I moved down to Florida, and the rest is history.
Right.
We ended
And
up
it
here.
obviously is working out.
Yes, it is.
Well, we're glad that you found your way to Colorado Springs area and thank him for his service and being retired now. And yeah, so let's get into it a little bit. For like I said, I hear, I'm not sure why, but people do open up to me in general, so no names are going to be shared.
Everything's
Um,
confidential.
exactly for privacy reasons. But I get both male and female with relationship issues, and it's not one-sided, and it all depends on their season of life, I think,
Mhm.
what's happening. So I see patterns, but I'm no relationship coach. I can just say from my perspective, and which is profound at times, but that's it. So what's the one thing couples do daily that slowly kills their connection without maybe even realizing it?
I think that couples, they forget that the other one cannot read their mind.
No.
Um, and that's honestly, that is the biggest piece of advice that I give when someone says, "All right, what's one piece of advice you're going to give me?" He can't read your mind. She can't read your mind. And of course, communication. You've got to communicate. And I think we get kind of stagnant over time, and in our relationship, and with anybody really, and we just forget that, oh, I actually have to talk to this person. Like we've been with them for so long, you forget they can't read your mind. You need to talk, and you need to talk effectively.
Right. And there's different styles of communication. And obviously, I mean, there's men are for Mars, women are for Venus, whatever. Um, I get that, but there's there's still a communication style that has to be met. If it's totally different, I'm not sure why they're together or how they got together, but I think you need to take in their perspective and somehow got to meet in the middle somehow to
Hmm.
communicate, or else there is no communication happening, right?
Exactly. And I actually, so when I coach on what I call the 5 C's. So it's connection with yourself, communication, comprehension, because you can talk all you want, but if you're not comprehending what each other is saying, you can talk to you blue in the face. It's not going to matter. Compromise, as long as you're not compromising yourself or your integrity or your values, and then connection with each other. So it comes back full circle.
I love that comprehension part because we, I've not just recently, but for the past year or so, I've had Amy Grant is one of my favorite singers, and she has a song called What You Heard. And it profoundly affects me because it's actually I looked into it and it's her to her daughter, but it could be anyone, a significant other or anything. And basically the song says, I was telling you I love you, um, and trying to make it up with words. So she was saying the same words, but it wasn't landing, it wasn't comprehending. So the words that she thought were so powerful kind of went against her because that's not what her child was hearing. And no matter how much we buckle down and say them louder, it's not going to get through. So we have to find a different way because it doesn't, if we keep saying the same thing over and over, we become a nag. And that's not what we're trying to do. So sometimes you got to get a little creative, right?
Absolutely. You heard of the five love languages. Well, I believe there are communication languages as well. Everybody communicates differently and everybody hears things differently. It's not always, the way you understand something is going to be different than the way I understand it. Um, but the bottom line, again, the bottom line is to talk with each other. So in that song, for instance, if she's saying all these things to her daughter's hearing it differently. It's up to the daughter to say, hey, mom, what did you mean by that? Like, what were you, what was the point, the purpose behind it? There's actually another song that I like to reference, and the actual name escapes me, but it's something to the effect of, well, you ought to know this by now.
All right. Okay.
And it's a country song, and it's, you ought to know this by now. It's like, we've been together so long, like, you ought to know this by now. Well, how am I supposed to know, that you didn't change your mind from last week to this week
So
if you don't tell me?
true. Well, and then when you say the person receiving it has to ask,
Mhm.
you and I both know that rarely happens. And the person receiving it, they may not even know that it's not landing, or again, you get labeled as a nag, and it's like, I need you to listen, I need to be seen and heard so we can communicate more effectively. But if you're with somebody, it doesn't have to be a romantic partner, it could be anybody, but for this purposes, if we use that, maybe they're not ready, to dive into their own stuff to even know that, hey, there's an issue.
Well, and that kind of comes back to the connection with self. So that's the very first C. If you are not grounded in yourself, if you do not have self love, self care, self worth, if you don't know what you want for yourself, how can you expect anybody else to know? Um, there's, again, you can't read your mind. Um, and when you do get that pushback, so, like I said, it would be up to the daughter to ask, hey, mom, what did this mean? If you're getting that pushback from the daughter, from the spouse, from whoever, and you're not understanding their response, but they're not coming to you and saying, hey, what did you mean? Then you need to go to them and say, something to the effect of, okay, well, I said these things and this is the response I got from you. I would like to talk about that. Can we carve out some time? I'm all about spontaneous planning. So,
I love that.
so yeah, put it on your calendar. But like, pencil it in, like, block out some time, and then when that time comes around and both of you are available, pop in there, and have that talk. But you both have to be ready, obviously. So,
Exactly.
but yeah, I just say, have that talk, get clear the air, get those questions out of the way. Those, even if it's uncomfortable, if it's somebody you love and loves you, then it's going to be okay. Like, you're going to be able to talk about it.
So then that kind of brings us into the next thing. I know you've talked about in general on your website and other places, basically the law of attraction in relationships. So how does that basically, how does what we think about our partner actually change how they show up?
I think um, that's a really good question. I think that how, putting it in perspective, like from your point of view.
Mhm.
So how does how they, your partner treats you, how does it make you show up? Um, yeah, it all just depends on, you know, first of all, knowing your own love language, and then making sure your partner knows your love language, or, vice versa, knowing theirs, and responding to them or talking to them or treating them in a way that is they're gonna respond to the best. So, if their love language is physical touch, then, even if it's not yours, that's okay. You want that's give and take. That's where compromise can come into play. And you show up a certain way for them, they're going to show up in turn, you know, appropriately as well.
Now, I have had years of listening to The Power from Rhonda Byrne. So I don't know if you're familiar or not. And that takes the from The Secret, the law of attraction. This goes into the next level. I wasn't a fan of The Secret just because I don't think you just sit there and, um, try and visualize and then things happen. I believe you have to put effort into it and you have to take action. So the power actually does that, but it does very well at giving examples of this like law of attraction of what you basically internally, what you're visualizing, your perspective, changing that
Mhm.
instead of the negative into the positive. And she did have an example of a marriage, I believe, and she basically acted as if. Now, I'm not a big fan of pretending. I don't have a poker face. I mean, I'm no good at that. But when you're ready, not everybody can do this. You have to, just like a an addict, which I've never done drugs. I don't really know any of that, but what we hear is addicts have to be ready to want to change, and then they can take the steps in order to do that. Well, the same thing with just our life in general. We have to be ready and be able to put things into place in order to be at the spot that we need to for other relationships and communication and things like that. So with that, that kind of goes along with the law of attraction and kind of, proves what you've said.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in um, you should never have to change for somebody else. Or you should never expect somebody to change for you. Now, obviously, if they're doing unsafe things or harmful things, that's different. But parts of their personality, things like that, quirks, things that you're like, you have to decide. Can I live with this? Is this something I can deal with, can handle? Um, but you got to get that figured out pretty early, and expectations, things like that. You can't just go into a relationship and be like, oh, this is great. And, 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, I didn't realize you did that. Or, oh, that was cute in the beginning. And,
Right.
but it's not cute anymore. You kind of need to set that stuff up right from the get go and be like, okay, if we're going to be serious, and obviously, you don't know like if your a relationship is going to last or whatever,
Yeah.
but at certain points, certain topics can come up, and you need to set up those expectations. All right, are we going to do joint bank accounts? Are we going to do, is that important to me? Is that important enough to me to end a relationship? That kind of thing. So I don't ever think someone should change for someone else. Um, Compromise comes into play there, and it's not necessarily changing. It's more, accepting. Am I going to accept this, or am I going to project it? Am I going to say, this is okay? I can deal with this. I can handle it. Whatever, it's not a bad thing. And that's another thing, is you don't want the other person to think that you think their things are bad.
Right.
It's like, no, it's just different. It's different than what I do or thought or, would want.
Right. So your clients, what do you see the age range in general? Are they younger, are they older, they're somewhere in between, or do you have the whole gamut?
I kind of have the whole gambit. The My clients that I work with recently tend to be younger. Um, and I have a client currently that's going to be starting in January, and she's in a marriage. And, when we met and had our introductory interview, she was like, my marriage is great. I want to work on myself. So we're working on her relationship with herself. And, but I find, you've got either, younger people that are just starting out, or older people that are, um, new in their current relationship. A lot of older folks that have been married for 30, 40 years, they don't think they need any. They're like, oh, we're good. We've been married 40 years. Like, we don't have any issues. Really? I don't believe you. But they, the way I look at it is, you bring your car in every year to get a tune up. You bring yourself to the doctor every year to get a checkup. Why wouldn't you do a relationship checkup? Why wouldn't you want to just at least take a peek and see what's going on? Maybe everything is great. Wonderful. Love that. But a lot of times there might be one or two things that, kind of bother you, or, like I said before, you're stagnant. You're not dating anymore. You're not doing all the things that you used to love. And maybe she wants that back, or he wants that back. And they're, not afraid to say it to each other, but because they're so comfortable in the spot where they are, it's like, why bother? It's like, well, because it's super important. That's why you should bother.
True. And some people, I think most of us in general, um, it's basically if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or things get comfortable and you don't know how to change anything. But there is something to be said about comfort, and a lot of people are scared of change. It's just human nature in general. So it might be that no, we're fine. And if we go and uncover something, uh-oh, then we've uncovered something.
Well, a lot of times it's not even about change. Um, I'm not saying you should change anything unless, something's not going well. A lot of times it's just, they kind of miss how things were, and I help them because, what I do just in general is I give people an outside looking in view of their relationship, whether it's their relationship with somebody else or themselves. But I give an unbiased, look at how things are. I have no stake in this, it's just my advice. And a lot of people just kind of, even couples where, um, they're either at the 7 year itch, or they're just past the 7 year itch. Um, but they often say, I miss how we were in the beginning. We don't date anymore. We don't do this. We don't do that. Maybe kids are involved, things like that. And one thing that's really tricky for guys, especially, is all of the changes over all those years, those, 4 decades, 5 decades you've been together, um, how much she changes, from teen to, you know, elderly. A woman goes through so many changes, and it's hard to keep up.
Right. Well, I know when getting back to your conversation or your thought about we should not change ourselves for somebody else. I asked, like, what age range do you have? I think, I don't know about the younger generation now, uh, Gen Z and all that. Millennials are kind of a hybrid, but I know Gen X and of course baby boomers, there was an expectation, especially for us females back then when we started becoming of age. And back then it was supposed to be you get married right out of high school, you have a one partner, and that's how it is. And you think a lot of people at that time, a lot of females were either hiding themselves or changing for the man because that's what society expected of us. And that's what we needed to do to kind of get the guy. Unfortunately, I think with Gen X, it was starting to, like the later Gen X into millennials, it was a little bit different. But how many of the baby boomers and the Gen Xers were stuck in that? And I don't know if at this point in time they have a reawakening or decide, wait a second, I let myself have to be somebody I'm not, and I'm ready to be who I am. We see it a lot. We always see it in celebrities, the 30-year marriages, 50-year marriages, 20-year marriages, and they divorce. And so that seems to be kind of in that generation that maybe that's what was happening at the time. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. And that's why I love the older folks that are getting back into the dating scene for whatever reason, whether it was divorce or death or whatever, because it is they have a whole new lease on life. And it's really just kind of fun to watch because, like you said, those generations, people born in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we were taught a whole different way. And into the 80s, kind of came the, you know, 70s and 80s, more of the women's lib, movement and whatnot. But even then, it's still dependent on your parents. And, if your parents were traditional and you watched it and you're like, okay, this is great. This is what I want. Or like in my case, my parents got divorced when I was very, very young, and there were a lot of unfortunate circumstances. So I knew that was what I didn't want. So I learned from my parents that way. But a lot of it, yeah, it's really, really just fun to watch the older generation starting over.
Yeah, I've got that. My mom had recently passed, about 6 months ago or so,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
my she had a lot of health issues, and my dad was primary caregiver and stuff, and they were married like 60 years, um, and for me watching this, I mean, there were just other circumstances, but I saw my dad pretty much disappear from what he was to become a curmudgeon, and that just the daily grind, kind of waiting for himself to die. And it's like, you can't go first no matter what. um so you know life happens and my mom passes away and he's lonely. He has started dating a woman his own age, and i I love it because she is more vibrant and doing stuff. She's independent on her own, and she has been. Now he comes and he's realizing life again, and it's so cute. He's like telling me the text messages, and then like, well, I sent this kissy emoji, and she came back and she said it was cute, and I just it's nice to see him that way, and I wish he could have had more of that. But I am grateful for what he's got now to actually be him again. Now he would not change a thing about with my mom and everything. So he says, which is fine, but I'd love to see him coming out again as who he used to be. He's like a teenager. It's hilarious.
That's awesome. I love that story. And yeah, it's so much fun. There's so many levels there in that story. You know, you've got the life he had with your mom, which I'm sure was wonderful and he wouldn't change. And um, that was a that's part of who he is, you know, and the person he is today is because, you know, partly because of all the things that have happened in, you know, his life. And
As
so
all of us are.
exactly. And that's why, you know, I always say, you know, when people are like, oh, would you go back and change anything? Absolutely not, because then I wouldn't be who I am. You know, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever. Like, I wouldn't change it. Was it terrible? Yeah, but I still wouldn't change it. But it's fun, you know, like you said, watching your dad. And then, you know, you add in the layer of technology and what's happening in this day and age. And then you add in the layer of, you know, dating somebody new and that excitement. Um, I used to say that I used to get a little sad because when I would think about the fact that I would never have another first kiss, you know, I would never get, you know, those butterflies you get like in a new relationship kind of thing. Um, and that's when I realized, you know, when I get thinking like that, it's like, okay, I need to change something here. Like I need, you know, if this is bothering me, then I need to let's go back. Let's go back to basics. Let's go, you know, let's take a few steps back. Let's stop and talk and realize what's going on. Um, and then those feelings go away because it's like I realize, you know, I wouldn't change anything just to have another first kiss. Like I couldn't even imagine not being with my husband. So
Right.
you know, not having him in my life. So yeah, it's a no brainer.
Right. So when couples say we've tried everything, in your perspective, what haven't they actually tried?
um, I agree they probably have tried everything, just maybe not either to the fullest or adequately or in the right way that's going to work for them. It really all comes back down at the core, it comes back down to communication. And if they're not communicating effectively, if they're not communicating, you know, I heard something one time. It said, "Talk better, not more,"
Okay.
and and you can flip that around for listening too. Don't listen with the intent of what you're going to say next.
Right.
You know, listen to actually listen. Um, I tell couples that have a hard time communicating and have a hard time sitting down and having a discussion without it getting heated because they're thinking about what they're going to say next and how to combat what he just said or she just said. And I tell them to set a timer. Um, and you each get 10 minutes to talk or 15 minutes or however much you need. Set a timer. He gets to say his piece. She can take notes if she wants to, but she has to listen. She can't say anything. She can't butt in. And then she gets 2 minutes to rebut, you know, whatever he said. And then she gets her 10 minutes. And, you know, if that's what it takes, then do it. Set a timer. Um, if that's going to force you to listen to the other person. And then what you're going to do is you're going to realize, oh, I've never done this before. Like I've not been listening all along. Um, I've been worried about what I'm going to say next, that I haven't heard anything that the other person has said. And I think that's probably the main thing that couples do wrong um, when they've tried everything is they haven't tried it correctly.
Yeah, I think that is a hard lesson, I think, for all of us in any relationship or any communication is to stop and truly listen to the person because you're right. We are always thinking about what we're going to say next. And there are a lot of people that, and it might be the stage of their relationship or something, because I hear this from other people. They've tried talking, they've tried this and that. And it's like, okay, well, maybe they're not listening and, and constantly thinking about what they're going to say. And it's always on the defensive, or maybe you are. So, and there's a lot of defensiveness in general. And I think a lot of people in general have a tough time communicating. I don't know if it's all about like an egocentric, it's me, me, me. And so that automatically puts the other person on the defensive. Or, it's saying, you're doing this, you're doing that. And so there's communication, and then there's um, choosing your words carefully. So maybe you don't start triggering, but man, communication is hard in general across the board. Just depends on where you are. And even if you have a good communicator and a poor communicator, guess what happens to that communication? It still falls apart. So that's
Yeah,
difficult.
I think that when you think about communication, you're, you think about one person, the other person, saying their piece or whatever. You want to think about it in a way of talking with each other, not at each other.
Mhm.
And if you go into the conversation already ready to fight, and you're either accusing or and you never want to say, you do this, you do that. You want to say, you want to make it warmer, like, hey, lately I've noticed, this behavior. This is how it makes me feel. You know, what do you think? Do you notice it too? Am I overreacting? Let's discuss this. Because if you come at somebody with that, they're going to go into fight or flight,
Right,
and they're going to put up that wall and to protect themselves. And you've already lost the battle.
right. And even if you do come at it that way, the other person has to be receptive in general, and you have no control over that person. You can try and say it as politely or as warm as possible, and sometimes that other person will never hear it that way. All they hear is you're accusing them, and that's frustrating.
Um, I think that probably happens more with newer couples. Um, in an established couple, like my husband and I, for instance, 28 years of married, 30 years of being almost 30 years of being together, if like I know how he communicates and he knows how I communicate because we've talked about it, and we've talked about, well, this is what I need. This is what I need when we're having a discussion or an argument or whatever, when calmer heads prevail, we'll say, hey, next time, just, he'll say, just say it this way, do it this way, to help me understand. And I'll say the same thing, well, this is kind of what I need or how I need to understand it. In a newer couple, when they're, if that other person is just not receptive to a calm method of talking or whatever, that might not be your person, and I mean, I'll never tell somebody, you need to break up, but, you want to look at some things, and really determine, okay, if this is how discussions are now, you know, are they going to improve? Are they going to get better? Am I okay with that if they don't? Like, am I okay with how this is going? And that's where those expectations and those needs come into play, the early on ones.
Right. Well, that's a good point, and kind of brings me into my next question. How do you know if you're fighting to save something worth saving, or if it becomes forcing something, or maybe you're just afraid of being alone?
That's a really hard one, because everybody's different. And in a relationship, everybody's different, but everybody's different just regardless.
Right.
And I mean, you definitely want both people to be on the same page. And if you're fighting and the other person isn't, it's that's very telling. If you're both fighting, then all right, well, let's talk about what are we fighting for? Are we fighting for the same thing and for the same reasons? Um, is it, it's like, oh, we're staying together for the kids. That's like one you hear a lot. Well, is it better for the kids to hear their mom and dad fighting all the time if that's what you're doing? And not everybody does that. That's not the only reason why people separate or get divorced, but that's a common one. It's like, okay, well, is it better for them that we're always arguing? What kind of example are we setting as a couple? Again, you're setting expectations for them for the future. And if they think this is how couples always behave, then that's what they're going to flock to. And so there's a lot of things that come into play and a lot of things that you got to think about when you're thinking about these major decisions. Should we stay together? Should we split up? Um, it really just depends on the circumstances and each person and if they're on the same page, whether it's, hey, we need to split up or what we need to fight this, fight for this.
Right. Yeah, that's a difficult one. And like you said, if you have children, you're an example either way. And like my parents were totally different than your parents on it. We both got lessons from it, but different ways. Mine, my dad, I made the commitment, I'm here for life, all that stuff, even though I was seeing, personally, I thought they should have divorced, like when I was in high school or college, and I would have been okay with it because I was seeing the degrading in their own personalities, but definitely in him, and especially over the years. And now seeing the difference in him, it's just like, okay, so you taught me, and he will never admit this, but I could see while just talking to him and how cranky and everything he was. But you're teaching me that no matter how unhappy you are, because you made that commitment, you have to stay, which I don't think is the greatest example either. You know, there's something to be said for making a commitment, absolutely. But, I don't know. So then also the ones that are divorced, then the children grow up thinking, okay, well, things don't last. So it's really a catch 22. Like you said, everybody's different and there's different lessons to learn, and we all have to figure out what are those lessons we need to for ourselves to go forward. But that's a different perspective I've had on a 60-year marriage.
Well, and that's so, twofold here. That is goes back to what you said before about, baby boomers and, Gen X and things like that. Back then, that was the way they did things.
Right.
When you married for life, whether it was for religious reasons, whether it was for, your parent pressure from your parents, whatever. Um, and so fast forward, that's a big reason why setting up those expectations and everything right from the beginning is so important, but also deciding, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we getting married? That's a big question, and a really important one to answer, because it's like, all right, well, we love each other, awesome, all right, let's see, are you compatible, are you, this and that, are you on the same page on the important things? um did you have an oopsie and she got pregnant and you're getting married for that reason? Well, that doesn't always turn out so great. um and then like you said, you saw the example that your dad gave you was, you stick with it no matter what. And that's not a horrible life lesson. If you've committed to something, it's kind of like our kids when they sign up for a sport, we'll say, all right, well, you have to finish out the season. You have to finish out the year, like, because you made a commitment.
Yep.
So,
And I've
you
been
know,
there too.
yeah. So there's definitely different levels of that. And I mean, at the same time, you don't want to be absolutely miserable. You don't want to be, um, you don't want the other person to be absolutely miserable either. So yeah, at what point do you say, okay, this isn't working anymore? Um, and then maybe, you know what, you go to a coach or you go to a therapist or you go to somebody that can help you, kind of work around these issues that maybe you're having and give you a different perspective.
Right. So what does it look like to work with you? So if somebody comes in, whether it's a couple, whether it's a single, kind of give us a walkthrough.
So, when I meet somebody, say at an event, like I'll set up a booth at a vendor event, um, I have a little like 5 question like survey that they can do, and they rate things on a scale of 1 to 10, and then they add up their score, and depending on where their score lands in the little chart, shows them, all right, well, maybe I need to talk to her, maybe we're doing great, and we don't need it. But that kind of gives them an idea of really where they're at. But whether I meet somebody there at an event or not, um, the first thing we do is a 30-minute interview. So it's free. And I ask you some questions, again, to kind of get your juices flowing, to like get you to understand, all right, this is what's happening, and this is where we need help, and this is the areas where we're struggling, that kind of thing. And then I offer 2 different programs. So I offer a 3-hour program, and then I offer a 90-day program, which works out to be about 8 hours.
And that's either for a couple or a single person. I mean, not single, but just one person and not the couple.
Yeah, so I say a couple or an individual.
There you go. That's the word.
Because it's not necessarily a single person. Like I said,
Right,
the gal that I'm working with in January is in a marriage,
right,
a very successful, happy marriage. Um, she's just not happy with herself,
right.
and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with her. And that's another thing is what people need to understand is there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing broken. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. We just need to work on some things and maybe tweak a couple of things so that the outcome is what more like what you want instead of what's happening. Um, but yeah, I work with couples, I work with individuals. Um, and when I work with individuals, if they are single, I can work with somebody who is just working on themselves, or I can work with somebody who, we can alter it so that if they are working on themselves because they want to get back into the dating world. So there's a lot of little dimensions.
Okay, great. Is there anything else you'd like to let my audience know that maybe we haven't touched them on?
I'm thinking. I I can't think of anything right off the bat. I would love for them to go to my website, of course, so they can learn more about my story and why it is I do what I do, and they can learn about just what's going on in my business and my life from there. But otherwise, and it's just relationshipsunlocked.com.
Mhm.
Pretty simple. But otherwise, yeah, I can't think of anything. We touched on a lot.
Okay. So, Mindy, this has been incredibly valuable for anyone who's ready to take the next steps, whether it's rebuilding their connection or finding clarity on their path. How can they reach you in addition to your website?
They can find me on Facebook at Relationships Unlocked One. That's my username or my page name on Facebook. They can call or text me. I don't know if you want me to give my phone number here, I don't mind. Um,
Whatever you're comfortable with. And I will also put this in the article and where I have the show notes. So anything, any way you want them to reach you, give it to me.
okay. All right. Well, yeah, they can call or text me 719-205-5935. They can email me, Mindy at relationshipsunlocked.com. But yeah, I'm pretty easy and open.
Okay.
So
Do you have an email just in case they're a little shy and they just don't want to call?
yeah, that's the Mindy at relationshipsunlocked.com.
Okay.
And it's Mindy.
Okay. Great. So I'll have that, like I said, in the article and stuff. So wonderful. This conversation is exactly why I believe every local business has a story worth telling, because behind every business is someone like you, Mindy, who's turning their personal experience into real value for others. So if this conversation resonated with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Colorado Springs Town Tidings at cos.towntidings.com and join thousands of locals who stay in the know on the go for all things Colorado Springs. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that could change your life or your business. I'm Sandy Zuniga, celebrating our city one business at a time. Until next time, keep discovering what makes our community special. Thank you, Mindy, for being here.
Thank you for having me.